Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast. I'm pleased to be joined again by Sandy Nelson, who, aside from catching huge trout on his local river and building fly rods, has come up with a really nice and comprehensive list of flies that hatch on his local river, the Don, along with a selection of flies to match the hatch. Although his list is specific to his home river, they occur on most of the rivers of the UK and beyond. I've always felt that we owe it to our quarry to learn a little about what they eat, and this is a great opportunity to get stuck in ahead of the coming season. Sandy, it's great to have you back on the Fly Culture Podcast. Are you overwintering well?
Hi, Pete. I suppose so, yeah. Nice and steady, just ticking over. As you know, we're in the midst of temporary accommodation while we wait to move into our new house in February. So that's sort of curtailed a lot of the rod building because I've lost a lot of the space for doing it. But I'm still ticking over with one or two, which is why it allowed me to concentrate a bit more on the flies and things this winter.
Looking at your social media and everything else, the rod building's been really, really busy. Like you say, you've taken it back a few steps, but that's been really productive for you, has it?
It's what I've kind of done is try to focus a bit more on trying a few more different types of blanks and got some different stock from different places to try out. And I've been a lot of experimenting. So rather than taking customers, I've taken a handful of customer orders mainly from existing customers who have come back for a second or a third one because it was easy and they're quite happy to wait and they appreciate the situation and everything. So, but otherwise, I've kind of been focusing on probably myself for a change as well, actually. So, which was quite good.
That's a nice way to look at it as well. And you it helps you reconnect with things a little bit as well, doesn't it? When you actually give yourself some time. But being, I know we were speaking the other day about it, and I'm still really keen to build something, but I'm so nervous about doing it. My friend Warren's doing it at the moment. He's doing all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff from old bamboo blanks. He's learning his trade on those and re-whipping them and learning that and then stripping it off and going again, which I think is, I'm just too shambolic for that. But tell me, did you come across any really exciting blanks that you hadn't seen before that you thought, oh, actually, I like that, and it turned out to play out the way that you hoped?
Well, currently the interesting one, I mean, you're saying that you didn't actually get round to building yourself a rod, but I know since the last podcast, there's quite a lot of people have built a rod in the last year, and they have been contacting me for advice and bits and pieces. So that side of it's been brilliant. So great. I love helping people do that, and it's really cool when you see their photos coming back and some of the problems they've had, and then they've overcome them, and that's been really enjoyable. I've had quite a good time with that this year with people and seeing some of the products that people have made, and first time, second time, and they're as good as anything any of the rest of us can make realistically, but bar being really, really picky. It's certainly more than adequate for fishing with and making you feel good about them. So personally, I think the interesting stuff I've had this last 2 or 3 months have all come from Shane Gray out at Grey Wolf in the States. He's produced a new range of his trout smiths, which is like an entry-level 4-piece glass. He's also done a brand new range with the Stefan graphite in 4-piece as well, and I've got quite a few of those here as well, and they're really, really nice. That kind of harks back to the last podcast as well. My favourite graphite was always the old 3-piece, 8'6" 4-weight Stefan graphite. I thought that was a fantastic rod. I've got a 9-foot 4-piece 4-weight at the moment, which just is, it is that evolution you were looking for at the end of the last chat, when you were saying, where do you think it's going to go? And I'm sort of saying, I'm not quite sure where it goes. But that's what Shane's done. He's taken the original mandrels, he's converted them to 4-piece rather than 3. They're overfit ferrules instead of spigots. And he's using a more modern cloth and resin. So he's getting the best of both worlds. He's getting it, they're lighter, they're crisper, but they're keeping that really classic taper. And they're just, they've been really impressive, I must admit. Really, really impressed with those.
You bloody suckered me in now. I'm thinking, I've got room for a 9'4" weight, and I'm thinking, right, okay. And I don't know if you find that, glass seems to be the more popular, and I find myself now searching out different brands, and I know a little bit about the Stefan stuff, but for me it's really, really interesting to hear about those 9'4" rather than 8.5'4" or whatever. It seems slightly more contemporary. I don't know how much difference that actually makes, but I'm fascinated to see these things going on. And again, for somebody who's trying to search out stuff that's a little bit different, that seems right up my street. So yeah, and this is part of it, comes back to me why I don't want to build a rod, because I can see it happening, speak to you and say, well, hey, can you do this for me? And you'll do a much better job, and I'll fish it. So that, I suppose it's the perfectionist in me coming out that is frightened that I won't get it right and won't use it. So that's why I've been so nervous. It's not that I've not wanted to. I think I just wanted to so get it right, and I haven't. I know John Ogborn has been building up a blank as well. So I wish him best of luck with that, and we will see that. But yes, that
Absolutely.
sounds really, really interesting. And do you detect that? Is glass mainly where you're seeing this continual growth in a marketplace?
I suppose the problem with graphite and carbon, from my perspective, is that's where the mainstream is, and a lot of the mainstream stuff is very, as you know yourself, is very, very good now anyway. So unless you're wanting something customized and you have an idea of either a specific blank or something you want, then the competition is too great. Whereas there isn't much in the way of mainstream glass, and the mainstream glass is nowhere near as good as the niche stuff that's available. So I think it's about they're two very different markets that have been dealt with two very different ways by the industry, I suppose, for want of a better way of looking at it. Probably down to volume. And I like everything else. I think I still love modern glass completely. It's my arsenal. I'm afraid I'm a Stefan-aholic. It's even got it on the T-shirt. Looks like. Definitely a Stefan-aholic, I'm afraid. But I evolved into that. And as I say, that new range of graphite that Shane's brought out on the Stefan mandrels it's really, really good. But niche, because it's old school actions, but modern school feel in terms of weight and swing weight and stuff. And I think he's got it absolutely spot on.
Wow, that sounds really cool. And do you are you in touch with these companies? Do they come to you, or are you searching out and saying, right, this looks interesting? Is it a combination of both? I'm guessing.
I mean, I deal a lot with Nico and Mike McFarland, and I speak to Tomo. I'm part of the Alternative Tackle Collective, so I get to speak to a lot of the builders, and we all have a big, for one, it's our own WhatsApp group, but that's really good. So there's lots of information gets passed backstage. I mean, Shane's he's a good friend. We've never met, we've never fished. It's a bit like but I class Shane as a really good mate. We speak a lot. I regularly, every few days, sometimes for days on end, about different things. And when he was doing the Troutsmith Nomads, he'd actually asked, I've done these, do you want to try them? And I said, well, absolutely, I want to try them, because they're 4-piece for a start, which makes them really easy to ship out. They were mostly short stuff, 5'11" for 1s and 2s, 7 foot for 3, 7'3" for 3 and a 4, all in glass. And I said, well, what you're missing is a 5-weight for me. So he went and he designed one, and 4 or 5 weeks later, he says, I've got you your 5-weight. He said, do you want to try it at 7'10"? I says, absolutely. So I got a batch of those blanks across, and that's been really good. That's my current what I'm messing about with at the moment, I'm away to send 2 or 3 of them out to a couple of my mates to try out. They'll probably take them down onto the river for grilling, which obviously is not what they're for. But I think come summertime, I'll have given them all a really good workout, and hopefully it'll be a new range for me to look at next year. On top of because it's more of an entry level. It's a different price point to the likes of the McFarlanes and the Adewans and the Steffens, and that's what Shane's been going for, to try and give a 2-tier system to make it a bit more accessible for people who maybe can't drop $600 odd on a brand new rod. If you can make it 400, it makes a big difference, and it might just introduce a few more people, and making them 4-piece makes them a bit more contemporary, a bit more easier to travel with. I have a feeling that people might look at the 6 foot, especially the 511 ones. That sort of it's a toy size, but these aren't toy rods. I was expecting them to be I didn't know what I expected them to be, because I don't normally fish anything below a 2 or anything below a 3, really. But that's just the nature of the rivers I'm fishing. And I think when I got my hands on it, especially the 2-way, it's so quick, and it's immense fun to fish with. I've got one built up, and it's just absolutely stunning fun. And I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, it's 4-piece, so it packs down into a 20-inch tube. This is the kind of thing that somebody could stick in a suitcase or the boot of the car, or if you're going on holiday anywhere with the kids or the family, or on a business trip or whatever, you can stick it. It takes up no room. Small box of flies, one reel, this little wee rod, and you can just go and find yourself a small stream somewhere. You don't have to go and find a river. You just stop by a burn or steal away for a couple of hours and get some sanity in the middle of the family chaos. You know what I mean? I'm thinking his ideas are just great. So that's probably the most exciting things I've got going on here at the moment, which is really nice.
That sounds a lovely collection of stuff. You touched on a 7'10" rod, and I'd noticed that 7.5 is your traditional length, but to me, and I'd love to know your thoughts, 7'9", 7'10". I've got 7'9" bamboo from Luke. There's I think one of your favourite graphite blanks, the Light Line, is 7'9". It's available there. The TXLF was a 7'10". It just felt to me a slightly more together length than 7.5 foot. Have you noticed that, or am I just sort of looking at my own rod collection thinking, oh, actually, I've just got more of those rather than the 7.5? I
mean, we're talking 3 inches of a difference. I mean, I know in some things 3 inches makes a hell of a difference, but I think your extra bit of reach, that little extra bit of reach, it's a balance. I've always found with glass it's a balance. So if you're looking at 4-weight glass, 7'3" to 7'6" is like where it seems to be at its best. But you can go up to 7'9" and even 8 foot if the taper's right. And what it does is the extra length gives you a bit more smoothness, but you don't lose the feel. What you do get is you get a little bit more tip weight. So it tends to slow it down a little bit. Whereas when you go back to 7'4", 7'3", 7'4", 7'6", whoever's blank you're looking at, it's a little bit crisper, more dry fly-esque. So I tend to find if the guys are going dry fly, they'll go for the slightly shorter one. But if they're using it for a mixture of things, so if they're fishing duo or they're nymphing with it, or maybe even small streamers, then they'll go up to 7'9", 7'10", 8 foot. 5-weight's not quite the same. The 5-weight seems to be better. 7'9", 7'10", 8 foot, even up to 8'6", depending on who it is. But usually once you get up to 8'6", you're better with a 6-weight. And I think it's to do with the required stiffness to cast the line. It helps with the glass over the extended length. Obviously, you've always got a weight penalty because it's naturally a heavier cloth than carbon anyway. And I think that's kind of how it pans out. You've got these windows where they really are maximised at what they do best. And it can be usage related. I mean, if you go for a shot, last winter I did a one-off Steffen 7 foot 5/6 weight blank. which Shane had inherited when he got the stuff, and he believes it's a one-off. He's still got the mandrels for it, but he couldn't find any records of it have it ever been made for anybody else. And I made it for a guy down in Manchester, Sean, and it's his streamer rod for small streams, and he reckons it's absolutely fabulous. And I mean, that's sort of the opposite side of the thing. That's 7 foot long, and it's a proper 6-weight, and it is a proper 6-weight. It's like an absolute cannon, as you can imagine. It just for chucking swim coaches and sex dungeons and stuff like that on sink tip lines. And he's punting these things under trees in these dirty Manchester streams where you can't see anything with some monster fish in them. And he reckons it's brilliant. So there are some very specific blanks that have been designed that are exceptionally good in different categories. But I think on the whole, that generalisation out, if you're 4-weight, you can go anywhere from 7.3 to 8 foot, depending on what you're going to use it for. 5-weight, I wouldn't generally go below 7'9". I'd be looking 7'9" to 8'3", probably, and then 6-weight anywhere from 8 foot up. But like I said, I think it's more to do with this, just the stiffness against the smoothness ratio, and who can get it right.
That sounds really. I guess I'm only going by feel because I haven't got your technical expertise, but that's how it's felt to me with a variety of different materials, and that, you know, like you say, in those different lengths, line weights, and everything else, it makes absolutely perfect sense. Now, answer me a question, because I think you may be similar to me. That you said that the rod building, because of your waiting to move house, has slowed down for a little bit. Are you one of those sorts of people that wants to always be doing something, keeping the mind agile, doing stuff, and that's how the natural flies of the Don came about? Is that, I'm suspecting you're very similar to me in that sense.
That is very much how it came about. It was something I've wanted to do for a long time. I mean, my interest in insects goes back before fishing. I was exceptionally lucky as a child. We lived as a sort of pre-11-year-old. I lived very close to my maternal grandfather, who I spent an enormous amount of time with. Now, he eventually taught me how to fish, although he didn't go fishing. He was just one of these sort of. He was a naturalist. An amateur naturalist, and his thing was plants. He loved the flowers and the trees, and whenever we went out for a walk, I got told the names of everything. Everything had a name, you know, and he could see the flies on the river, but he didn't know what they were, and he would tell me, they had different names for this in northeast of England, and they had different names for all the flies, and so he knew what the locals called them, but he didn't know what they were. From 12 onwards, we moved, and we were actually very close to my paternal grandmother, now, who was also a naturalist, but her thing was birds. She loved birds, so I got told the names of all the birds and everything else. And whichever one we lived closest to, on my school holidays, I spent all my school holidays with the other one. This was right up until I was probably 18, 19 years old. So these were the two people I found the most interesting in the world, because they knew the names of everything. So I think there was always as I got into fishing about 8, 9 years old, let's say I get this right, my grandmother and my auntie bought me my first fly tying kit. And that was, for me, it was like nobody knew how to tie flies. I had a box of flies that I bought from the shop because those were the ones that people used. But I didn't know, my own brain was already going, well, what's this meant to be? I guess it's just the way I'm wired. Like I said, all those influences, it's like everything has a name and everything has a reason. These are yellow and these are pink and these are purple, these are blue. And it was almost natural. Well, what's this meant to be? And the lack of information at that time, I learned to tie flies from Bob Church's column in the Angling Times. I used to cut them out, and I still have the scrapbook with them all pasted in, and they're like 40 odd years old now, these cutouts. They're still in my scrapbook. But it was all rainbow lures mostly. So I'm tying rainbow lures, but knowing it's not for my fish on the river, because I was on the River Weir when I learned how to fly fish. And it was, I can't remember whether I bought it or whether I asked for a fly tying book and somebody bought me it. But I was given a copy of Taft Price's Rough Stream Trout Flies. And that just from there, because he talks about the insects and he identifies the insects. And there's the North Country section, and this was, right. Well, I'm in the North Country, so this must be what I have to use, as you do as a kid. This is where I am. This is what I should be using. And you read that, and these are easy to tie as well. This is good. This works for me. They're nice and quick. And I learned how to tie spiders and got more into it, and it basically went from there. So this year, I was kind of going, like you say, I was having the break from rod building. It was almost going back to my roots. It was a case of, right, I've taken pictures of the insects on the river. When the fishing gets quiet or there's bugs flying about or whatever, I'll actively look them out, and I take as many photos of those as I've ever done of the fish. And it was that, coupled with, I regularly get asked questions. I've seen this today, or can you identify this picture, or the fish were taking these, what do you think it is, or what will I use to represent that? And it was the idea being formulated for a long time. And I'd spoke to Mike, because Mike obviously runs our the Fish in the Fly website. And I already have up on there lots of advice for fishing the Don that's been updated over the years. And he said, this, if you can get it to work, this will be a really good idea. So between the two of us, that's where it came from. I had all the pictures, I wrote all the text, I did all the research, I cross-referenced it with stuff from Pat O'Reilly, and used my own books. I've got all the fields, the FSC books as well, with all the different insects. I was making sure my identifications were correct for the things, so everything was accurate. And we said to Mike, well, there's lots of books. And John Goddard's Waterside Guide as well. It's another book that gets used a lot in my house. But you never carry books when you're fishing. I've always got my phone with me, though. So I said to Mike, if we can put this in a format where you can look at it on screen when you come home, if you're sitting going through your photos, you can cross-reference it. But at the same score, if you're on the riverbank, you could flick on your phone and just go through it quickly, and it provides that. I couldn't see anybody else doing that was focused towards fishing. If you go on and search for a specific insect, you can find it. But there was no quick reference to go in and sort of scroll through and go, oh look, okay, these are roughly in order of the year. So I'm fishing, I'm in June, it's one of these, it's one of that. So that was kind of where the idea came from. And I mean, at the risk of sounding, I'm really proud of it. I think it's fantastic, and it seems to work. And everybody that's looked at it thinks it's a great reference as well. So it's been, so far, very successful. And I hope it helps a lot of people with where they're going with it, with when they are on the river. The fly book.
And I can only echo that, because I know, I said in the introduction that I think we owe it to our quarry to learn a little bit more. And I don't think you need to delve down into Latin names or anything like that. Of course you can if you want to, but having the ability, I think it's a great idea. And my business mind's already going, cool, wouldn't that make a great app as well? But you can just get it on your phone anyway, can't you?
Yeah. It was set up so you could save it and you can access it on your phone quite easily. I'm the same as you. I mean, obviously, I read the book, so I know they've got Latin names, but they mean nothing to me. I'm not a scientist. I'm an angler, so it was done from the aspect. I actually thought about, from my perspective, how do I identify the flies? To make it easier, because figuring if I do it, then other people will do it. So the number of tails, the types of the wings, the bits that were obvious, the colours, and I think it can be broken down into that. And there's some crossovers. Obviously, the fly selection is relatively simple because of that. But the individual insects, for me, it's more about where you're going to find them on the river, when they're going to hatch, what the rough sizes are, so that's what you're looking at, rather than I'm fishing a such and such hatch, so I need such and such a fly. It's a case of, well, actually, this is June or this is May, and there's some flies coming off, so it's probably those. Now, where are they coming from? Are they coming out of the fast water up here? Because that's where the nymphs probably live. And so I'm going to find the adults at the tail of the pool. I know that, so I've tried to put that information into there so that somebody will think, oh, okay, so we'll go and sit at the tail of the pool and watch. Oh, absolutely, actually, this is where the rising fish are. And hopefully it'll guide people a little bit onto where the rising fish might be sitting as well.
That's great. And that's a great tip in itself for people. And, as you well know, we talk about observation a hell of a lot on here and taking time to see what's going on. And the river always opens itself up, doesn't it? It'll always tell you if something's happening, if something's not happening. And like you say, that tip is an absolutely fabulous one. And we're going to move on to the flies very shortly. Did it take you long to do, though? Because that, like you say, the cross-referencing, and something like that, you're really putting your head above the parapet, aren't you? Because
a little bit,
yeah, because you want it to be right, and sometimes when something goes out, you always worry, oh, have I got that right? Have I got that? So I know you've obviously drilled all the way down into that, and that's worked fantastically well. But how long did it take you to collate and put together?
It actually took quite a while, because there's 30 plus years worth of watching the river and identifying the flies myself. So my first step basically was how do I do it? I was thinking, how do I identify the flies when I see them? And so I broke it down into the key things I'm looking for. Like I said, the size of the hind wing, the markings on the main wing, the overall size of the fly, the number of tails, not spots on legs or how many toes it's got, or crap like that. It was kept to the stuff that you can actually see. The rest of it's for a different level. It's not for catching fish. It's not. I appreciate, and you don't need the subgenres. So knowing that our plan was to move this year and we'll have the winter off, I kind of focused a lot during the season on expanding my collection of photographs. And that, coupled with a slight change in the way I was fishing this year, I was trying something a little bit different. I had an idea I wanted to try out for the fishing as well, which proved fascinating. That also helped me capture more fly photos. Also illustrated something that I hadn't actually realized myself over the years. I'd been doing it accidentally, but I'd been representing flies that I didn't actually realize I was representing by doing something different. That got me thinking as well as I was going through, pulling all this information together. So it was a really interesting and fascinating process for me, myself. I would say overall, it probably took me a couple of months to pull everything together. And then poor Mike had to then try and figure out a format that he could put it onto the site. It took another 2 or 3 weeks of us getting it right to get it so it would sit right, so that people could read it easy, and it wasn't too wordy, but it had enough info. It's all of those things that you're trying to balance all the time, especially for use on a phone.
Yeah, and that's a good point as well, because you don't want, if you're on the riverside and you're saying, well, what's hatching? You don't want to know the Latin name or whatever. You want to say, right, what is it? What sort of size? What sort of fly do I need to use when you spotted it?
Yeah, so the photos were the main thing. So it was to get really good, clear, crisp photos that were easily identifiable, and then have the suggestions and the environments, so you could just scroll quickly and go, oh, this should be in that bit of the river. Oh yeah, there's some ideas. I could try one of these as a fly. And I think it works. It works quite well.
Yes, it does, absolutely. And I know we put it on the Fly Culture Facebook page, and this is why
I appreciate that. That was great.
No, it's because it's really good, and the response was really good, and that's why I wanted to speak with you today, because it is so good. I think anglers should be having a look at it as well. So, but let's look at the list of flies a little bit, and we're going to touch on it. And I think It seems to me that you have a logical list of flies that read as though they are listed pretty much as the hatch would happen throughout the year. Let's
The
start.
idea, yep.
Yeah, let's start with the ephemera or the upwing flies, or if in the US you'd probably call them the mayflies, and we'll go
Mayflies.
subsurface first and look at the nymphs, and you sort of categorize those a little bit as well, and some stone turning and stuff like that can help you as well when you get to, particularly if it's a new river as well. And this is again, I think, where the guide can come in really useful, that you can go turn a few stones and have a look and see what's going on, can't you?
Yeah. Well, the nymph side of it was one of these things. It's obviously there's as many nymphs as there are adults, and there's so many different types and the different sizes, slightly different colours and everything else. But I think from an angling perspective, they're not. It's not that important. The size of them is important, but the overall species doesn't really matter, other than at what point in the year they would hatch. Yeah, so it was more. I turned over the rocks to get the photographs. That was quite good fun. It was like being a big Ben again, you know what I mean? Chasing these things around the rocks, trying to get, especially the stone clingers, trying to get the stone clingers to get off the rock and get into the pot so I could get a picture of them, and then identifying them myself. And I'm looking at them, and I've got like 3 or 4 different types of stone clinger in these little pots, and I'm looking at them crawling around, and I'm thinking, yeah, I could sit with my book and identify these, but there's not much point other than it's a stone clinger and it lives in this environment. And then we went to the agile darters, and I had 3 or 4 of those, and thinking, yeah, and it's the same. They live in this environment. This is where you'll find them. But on the whole, the nymphs, I didn't want to get into too much detail with them. It was just to illustrate, those are stone clingers. These are the agile darters. And it took me a while to find a silk burrower. And we've got Cenis and we've got Mayfly, Danica Mayfly on the Don. That's an interesting wee thing we can talk about when we get to that, because that was a big revelation for this year, and it's all to do with floods and the moving silt around and everything else. So they're only the only real 2 we've got. But we have other rivers round about that have got turkey browns and other things, which are also silk burrowing nymphs, which the photograph on my list is there as an illustration, is actually a turkey brown nymph. Now, we do have them on the Don, but they're not of any, you would never hardly ever see them. They're more up some of the tributary rivers, because a lot of the tributary rivers come off agricultural land, and they are quite silty. Whereas the Don itself, as you know, is more of a freestone river throughout its length, apart from the odd section here and there. So there's a lot of the things can be localized with stuff like silk burrows, whereas the stone clingers and the agile darters are everywhere. They're throughout the river system. Blue-winged olive nymphs are a moss crawler, they class it as, you know. But again, I've found them anywhere that I find all the other nymphs. You know, it's weeds, it's stuff on the rocks, it's on logs, it's on whatever's in the river. The idea was just to try and keep that as simple as possible, really. You know, it's more about profile.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is already triggering so many questions. So sorry for jumping in there. There's so much I'm thinking about. And it is, you say about turkey browns, and I think about those, and perhaps listeners don't know what they are. And I think it's a May time fly, isn't it? Would you say similar to sort of a March brown type fly? Would that be a nearish sort of approximation?
Yeah. It's a turkey brown is like a March brown without the clear spot in the middle of the wings, and probably a much darker coloured body. They tend to be a really like a clarity colour, don't they? A lot of the time, they're a lot darker, and they've got 3 tails, whereas a March brown only has 2. That'd be the easiest way to tell the difference straight away. But I say we don't. There's turkey browns we've really very, very, very rarely see on the Don, so I didn't bother putting them on the list. You know, if it was one of those things, it was a case of, well, it could be added. If I get some photographs, I'll maybe tag them in at a later date. But it's not something that the fish, our fish certainly, if they take it, they're taking it because they think it's a marsh brown. But then I think they do that with a Brookton as well, to be honest. But we can get onto that as we go through.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very valid point, isn't it? That, the fish have a small window to see. And that's where identifying the fly is useful. It's cool. But it helps you identify the size of the fly as well. And again, this is where the guide comes in really usefully, that it can tell you about the size. And you were talking about, one of my favorite, I suppose we should really move on to, wanted to go on to blue-winged olives because I know we touched on them, but let's try and move through the year a little bit. We won't go too deeply. My observation has always been that olives start dark and generally get lighter as the year goes on. But large dark olives, that's a really important hatch. It's not necessarily just for the start of the season as well. But, people talk about those and, as you say, large brook duns and spotting the differences between those and March browns and things. Did you have anything you noticed about that at all?
Well, if we look at large darks, I would imagine it's river specific as well, because our large dark olives, I would say colour-wise, stay much of the same all season. What changes is the size. So early season, some of ours can be nearly like a size 10. They're usually a size 12, bang on. And as the season goes on, they get smaller. So come September, large dark olive hatches on pretty much every day of the year. There's some of them trickle. They'll be heavier early season. It's more apparent because there's less other things hatching, but they're there all year. And come September, they're right down to a 16, sometimes even an 18. But they're still large dark olives. If you catch them and identify them, they're still large darks. And that's covered by the same imitations, just in different sizes. What I discovered this year, not so much with the large darks, but with olive uprights, was our uprights do the same, and I'd never noticed that. It was because I was focused on getting pictures of insects and I was catching different things that, for me, an olive upright hatch was always an 11 a.m. to 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Big flies, best hatch of the season. They're size 10s, they're great. Trout love them. The big trout really love them. If you're going to catch big trout early season, so from last week in April through to about the beginning of June, olive upright hatch is the one you want to be on the river for. And I think I was fishing. I made a point this year of fishing a lot of evenings because I was exploring dimple rises, but that's a different story. But as the evenings were going on, I was seeing flies on an evening that the profile, I'm thinking, that's an upright, but it's not big enough. And I was catching them and taking photographs. And then when I'm getting home and I'm going, actually, it is an upright, but it's like a size 16 upright. No idea. Never noticed that ever before. And they're orange. The big ones from the daytime are yellowish bellies and a pale green back and a beautiful, elegant insect. And these things are orangey yellow with rusty sides on them, and it's an olive upright dun. But it's a completely different colour. It's a completely different size. And you look at it, you're thinking, oh, this is really interesting. And that drove, I think the uprights in particular drove a lot of that, because when I realised that, I'm thinking, well, I'm fishing spent spinners on a night, but this is almost orange enough to be this. And the same goes with the blue wings. The colour variation in the blue-winged olives was incredible. I had them everything from really bright green, like aphid green with a slightly darker back, right down to grey dun colours with orange underbellies and everything. And they're all duns. This is not spinners or changing. This was just a colour variation in one species of fly. The blue-winged olive is the easiest one to identify because it's got 3 tails. And it has a big, almost a round hind wing. Whereas, and it's slate grey wings. So it really is it's an easy fly to identify. But you would look at it and you think, well, actually, that's not olive, that's grey. And this one's orange, and this one's bright green. But it's all the same fly, And that was the real interesting thing for me this year with doing this particular project. I learned an awful lot about how some of the not misconceptions, but you make an assumption. You catch one and you go, it's a blue-winged olive. But you don't know what colour all of these blue-winged olives are that are on the water. And it does make a difference. I think that's maybe the reason why sometimes you can be fishing, you'll maybe catch more on a spinner than you do on a dun imitation because of the difference in colour. And it's not because they're taking spinners, it's because the duns are maybe a more rusty orange colour, and that's the hue that they're seeing in the darkness,
Great tip. That is fantastic. I love that. And great tip for spotting blue wings as well. We talked about brook duns and March browns. Is there a way, because I don't think it matters too much it's not, but I was thinking from a fly selection point of view, but for people to say, actually, it's a March brown or it's a brook dun, would it be fair to say that there's fewer March browns, certainly where I am, but would that be your observation?
Not with me, no. Our March brown's much bigger than the brook dun hatch. If you're seeing them on the water, generally, I think, certainly up here, our brook dun hatch comes after the March brown hatch, so they don't really cross over. The olive uprights cross over the March browns and the brook duns. But I think the two, you very, very rarely see March browns and brook duns out at the same time. Our brook duns, the March brown has that mottled wing, which makes it obvious, two tails, and it has like that it has a light claret brown colour to it and a creamy body. Brook duns are more yellow. The wings are freckled the same, but it's a yellow. Ours certainly have a much more yellow olive hue to the wing, which is quite distinctive. They're also about a size or two bigger. And I think the biggest thing, more than anything else, is they sit. I'm going to show you in the picture. The March brown will sit on the water with its wings together. A brook dun will often sit with its wings apart. And there's very few of them. The upwings, the ephemera, will sit with their wings apart when they're on the water, but a brook dun will. And I think that's one of the biggest things, easiest ways to spot the difference. They've also got longer legs. And I would say generally, if you say, my God, look at the size of that March brown, it's a brook dun. They behave differently as well. March browns hatch at the surface of the water. Brook duns don't. Brook duns crawl to the side and climb up. So the trout often won't see brookies anyway.
Brilliant.
Which makes them less interest to the fish. But you will find the cases on the weeds and stones and stuff at the side all burst out. I've got some good photos of those as well. But that said, on the day the brook duns, the wind's either blowing them onto the river or they're hatching at the surface for whatever reason, then some of the biggest fish in the river will just sit and pick them off. And you just great big huge orange clinkhammer. Or the Goddard split wing emerger, the one that's in my fly box. That in a size 8 in orange, and they'll just nail it. They'll just wallop into it.
Brilliant. That's such a great tip as well about the wings, and so people can be, I'm learning stuff as well, and this again shows how much time and effort you've put into this to make it such a comprehensive yet easy to understand guide. You mentioned about mayflies and something you learned about mayflies as well. Do you want to share that with us, Sandy?
Well, the Don, certainly as a teenager, I fished the Don for 30 odd years. 30, nearly 40 years now. Anyway, mayflies was something I never saw at all on the river. I think the last 15, 20 years maybe, I'd heard little bits, people saying, I've seen mayfly on the Don, I've seen them here, I've seen them there. I'm thinking, I've never seen, I'm on the river all the time, I've never seen mayflies. You're seeing brook duns or something, or because brookies can be pretty big, yourself. I've seen them up to nearly a size 6. They're huge flies. And you're thinking that. And then a couple of seasons ago, I was quite a fair bit upriver, which is actually quite close to where my new house is, but that's beside the point. Funnily enough. And we were fishing and we were watching these things hatch. And I said, I was fishing with Liam Stephen at the time, and I said to Liam, I said, that's mayflies. And he goes, where? I said, there. And we're both watching this thing. And we're being, it was stupidity, but we were trying to catch flipping things, and it was probably damn right dangerous. But I just wanted a photograph of a mayfly on the Don, and that was the first time I'd ever seen one. And we were looking at the river afterwards, thinking, well, why are they here? And it had this big long stretch, and it was quite slow. And it was a case of, okay, fair enough, that makes sense. This is a sort of silty bottom part of the river. It's not as just a touch slower. And then we had that huge storm Frank, I think, a few years ago, and then we had another one a couple of years ago where the river came up quite, moved a lot of stuff about. And my home beat at Inverurie, it has a couple of slower sections. And this year, I'm fishing away. I'm quite happily. I can't remember which hatch I was fishing. It was June, so it must have been probably blue-winged olives, to be honest, because I was sometimes hatch early on in the day during June, and we had hawthorns on the go and everything else. And I'm watching this fly hatch across the river, and I'm thinking, that's a brook dun at the surface. And I'm watching, and I see these yellow wings coming out. I thought, that's a yellow may. And then as it slowly stretched out, and thinking, holy shit, that thing's huge. What on earth? No, it can't be, And it was like, really, it must be a mayfly. The only thing that could be that big is a mayfly. So I literally ran across the river, and I caught it. I lifted it off the water while it was hatching. I put it on my rod handle, and I just took photographs of it, and photos and photos and photos and photos, and then I put it back onto the water and let it fly away. And over the next couple of weeks, I saw quite a few of them, and on certain conditions, you were getting quite a few of them coming off, and the fish were ignoring them. And I thought, well, that kind of makes sense, because it's the first time I've ever seen them on this stretch of the river. So the fish aren't used to seeing them. They probably don't know what they are. Certainly when they're coming off in ones and twos. But there was one afternoon, there was quite a lot of them came off in one shot spell, and I noticed there was 2 or 3 of the fish suddenly keyed onto them, and they were making quite a noise. And I'm thinking, this is stuff I've read about all my life from the chalk streams and everything else. I'm finally seeing it on my river. So I'm not sure how much of that is a change in climate or conditions, or just the fact that maybe these floods have moved the nymphs. When they've picked up the silt and shifted it downriver, they've dumped all the nymphs in different parts, and they're now establishing new colonies in different parts of the river. So there'll be very specific, area specific. It still is, but then that goes for a lot of our flies. I'm not sure about yours. Yours probably the same. I would imagine most rivers are pretty much the same, that you will get certain areas where you'll get a greater density of a hatch of a specific species. And once you know your bait, like you say, or you're with a guide will know that. And he can put you on the right flies in the right spot at the right time of the year, because he knows where the bulk of these insects are. And I think that's a great thing to learn and squirrel away for everybody. If you're a regular on a certain water, to learn, actually, I see a lot of these here, or I'll catch a lot of fish on yellow maize at this particular part of the river. Because that's another very specific. It is with us that you'll see yellow maize all year from May right through until the end of August with us. But in small little, one here, one there, one here, one there. And you'll see that on most of the river, and then all of a sudden you'll come to one stretch of about 50 yards, and you'll be standing there, and there'll be yellow may after yellow may after yellow may after yellow may coming down, and the fish are going mad for them. And these are the only fish in the river that are eating yellow maize. None of the others will touch them. And I've had that experience on the Don. I've had it on the Annan. I've had it on the Devon. So I know it's but very, very localized to a stretch or a spot, And it's all to do. I think it's all to do with how many obviously the bottom, how many live there, the insects, the topography of the river, and that definitely is good stuff to know. It's great stuff to learn, especially if you, like you say, if you fish your own river regularly. Little bits of information to squirrel away. There's reasons why you see all of them flies there, or you've caught all your fish on the tup's indispensable in that pool and nothing else,
Yeah,
That's
no,
all.
absolutely. Yeah. And I know with yellow maize, we get them. And the last few years, there's been more and more, but they're like the starter for the Danicas for me. That it
Okay.
kind of gets, because we get a lot of large darks, but the fish don't rise to them. And I don't know if that's
Really?
water temperature coming off the north side of the moor, if it makes it colder and it takes longer for the fish to start rising. It's usually Granum
Mm.
that get the fish starting to rise where I fish. The yellows I've noticed more over the last few years, but I've not really noticed fish eating them in any major way. That's only where I fish. And then the Danica come, and again, it takes a bit of time for the Danica for the fish to take notice of them and start rising, and then they switch off them just as quickly as they've switched on them. And then it'll probably be midges or something like that they tend to look, and then caddis and everything else from there. And like you say, knowing your own river, spotting, we have a silty river, so that helps the population of mayflies. So it's
Yeah.
a great one, and it's a really, really exciting time to fish and an enjoyable one. But we've been talking so long already, but we're just going to let this go because it's so good. But I wanted to move on to caddis or sedge, or if we want to be fancy about it, trichoptera. That I thought I'd throw that in anyway. But
Yeah, why not?
there are such a massive amount of different species.
Yeah.
Is that then down to concentrating on size and colour more than anything else for you, rather than getting bogged down into the minutiae of that hatch?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's why in the fly, when you go into the fly box section on the stuff that was writing, I only fish one sedge pattern. It's a mishmash of a variety of different sedge. Anything works, and it is all purely size and color. I mean, my really good mate Scott Cumming, who is a fantastic fisherman. He's absolutely fabulous fisherman. He developed the Goddard's emerger into a pattern that really works really, really well on the Don. And the sedge I use is a slightly simplified version of his, because I haven't got quite the same patience he has for tying flies. So I took some of his key bits and put them together and made it a little bit easier for me to tie, and kept it within my. Everything I tie has this element of spider about it. I just like straggly, scruffy legs everywhere, So his fly is being very, very well developed, and he catches an awful lot of really good fish on it. So it was natural when he showed me it, I was to go and make some and try it out. And that in different sizes for me is all I ever need.
Yeah.
It's dead simple. It's just, well, you can see it online. It's I don't know how you describe it. It's a cross between a sedge hammer and a CDC and elk and a deer hair sedge. It's a bit of each, but just kept simple. And I think size is everything for sedges. And that experimentation, when you're fishing them, the fish are either looking for them dead drift or they're looking for them moving, depending on what they want. And if they're ignoring it, dead drift, tweak it. And the second you tweak it, usually they'll wallop it, and then you spend the rest of the night making these things skate across the water and do all sorts of different things, And then the next night you'll go out and they want to dead drift again, and you're having to work out drags and drifts, and the slightest bit of drag and they ignore it, and it's just fish being fish.
Yeah, that's why we love it so much, though, isn't it?
Absolutely, of course it is. It's different every night. It keeps you on your toes, makes you have to think.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's, we're talking really generic, and when I'm thinking of caddis, actually, I was salmon fishing the Devon one September, and I noticed that there was a lot of black caddis hatching. So I sometimes have some of those in the pattern, but like you say, generic tends to work really well. And that comes nicely onto stoneflies as well. I could bore you with the Latin. I know you know it, but let's not do that. And are they an important hatch on the Don? Because I remember I fished the Annan once and took some photos of those huge stoneflies on the rocks that had shed there, and the nymphs had come out, climbed over the rocks and gone there. And at home, we don't really get those. I've seen them on the X very, very occasionally, but we get alderfly and needlefly. They're the ones I think fish take a most interest in. But how important are stonefly patterns? And the reason I ask that is that there aren't really a huge amount of stonefly patterns out there, are there?
No. For me, they're not very important at all, to be honest. If I came across the very, very odd occasion I've seen trout hitting natural stones, I've just used a big sedge, or whatever my standard sedge pattern is. I mean, we've lots of stonefly too. We've got needle flies, we've got February reds, we've got yellow sallies, we've got the isoperla, the big isoperlas, the great stoneflies, the huge ones. They're fascinating. The fact that only the female can fly and the males don't have wings, and they're the ones. All of that sort of side of it's great. I always think they look quite Jurassic as well. It's like dinosaur flies when they're skittering about because they're so clumsy and huge looking things. But in terms of for the fish, I mean, historically, obviously, North Country, North England, North Scotland, the borders, Clyde, the Tweed, they used the nymphs as bait. I think they used to call them gadges or something, I think. So they used to use them actually catch them and use them as live bait. So the fish obviously eat them, certainly the nymphs. You mentioned alderfly, which is interesting. We have lots of alderfly. Now, for me, an alderfly isn't a stonefly. It's a completely separate species. And it behaves in a different way. Because stonefly lay their eggs in the water, same as the sedges and the ephemera, whereas this is all the stuff I've learned this year. Whereas an alderfly actually lays its eggs on the weeds at the side of the river, and when they hatch, they drop into the river. Then it's just quite an interesting little quirk. But I know alderfly can be different. Alderfly is an interesting one because I think when the fish on the odd day with us, it would be a very odd day, but they can switch into alderfly and they'll chase them and they'll feed on them. Again, it's just a big sedge. You match in size and profile, nothing specific. But I don't know about the rest of the country. I know there's some rivers from speaking to other people where alderfly is quite a significant hatch for them, but not really for us up here. I think they're spoiled.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I noticed it when I was guiding once on the X that they were eating them. And it's easy, like you say, to replicate them because it's about as nearer to a caddis as you can get. And I often see people show a picture and say caddis, and I'm too polite and I never one of those say, well, actually it's an alderfly. But it doesn't matter, does it? If you put that caddis or caddis pattern, it's going to work really well for them as well. Yellow sallies are an interesting one. I've noticed that Dartmoor, they'll eat them up there. And I've noticed where I fish more down on the lowland part of the tour that I noticed the last 2-3 years there's been more of them and the fish are eating those a little bit more. And I found a light caddis seems to have done okay for me with those. But one of the ones I'd love to touch on with you as well are terrestrial patterns. And, we're seeing people, and I've tried really hard and, I've used them, had them in the box, and I often say I've not used them enough. The last 3, 4, 5 years, I'm using those a little bit more now. And there was a fish that broke the hook on an ant pattern that I had. That was phenomenal. Did you have any observations from terrestrials and what you were looking at there that you thought might be of value to listeners?
Terrestrials, again, I deal with terrestrials very simple. My mate, Paul Proctor, his APT is the only fly you need, the only style of fly you need. I tie them on curved hooks and straight hooks. I tie them in a 16 and an 18 in black with a a grizzle hackle cut at the bottom. I tie them in a 12 and a 10, black with a grizzle hackle cut in the middle and legs on the side for a hawthorn. I'll tie them in a 14 with natural natural squirrel and a cree hackle, and it's a cow dung fly. You can tie them size 18 in bright green with a badger hackle and clip them, and it's an aphid. It does everything. It can be an ant. It basically covers everything except a specific beetle, really. And I think it's a brilliantly simple fly. It's dead easy to tie, and it's so effective. I just vary the size and the color depending on what it was. But I mean, for our rivers, I carry it small and black for smuts and anything that blows into the river. I carry it in a 12 as a hawthorn, a 14 as a cow dung, and I carry it in a size 20 for an aphid, because they fall off trees, you know, and that pretty much covers me for all my terrestrials. I have a couple of beetle patterns. I think Paul's one with the little high-vis post is probably the best one available. The one that he does with the straggle fritz, but again, it's because it's simple and easy. All it needs to do is go plonk. I think I would say I would probably, for the dawn at home, I know it's different in different parts of the country again, but certainly for me, I find a big hawthorn excuse me, is often better than a beetle. If I've got a fish that's sitting tight into a bank that's feeding on something falling out of the tree, usually it's a hawthorn it'll take. Even if it's July or August and the hawthorns haven't been on the river for 2 months, that fly with the big legs, and it makes enough of a noise when it hits the water that they seem to if they are going to take it, that's what they'll take. You know, so I think I've always got hawthorns in my box all season round for that reason.
Yeah.
But I think you definitely need terrestrials. Any river you're on where you've got, I mean, if you've got open farmland round about you, you need little black flies and all the rest of it. If you've got trees, you need aphids. You know, you definitely need terrestrials with you. I've always got a couple of strips in my box are always dedicated to terrestrials.
Yeah, me too. And funnily enough, I remember John Boone, my good friend, came down and he was guiding with us. And that's when I first saw the APT. And although I'm not tying, I bought a bunch, and I've got a bunch in my fly box as well, just for that. And then a foam beetle. My friend Duncan Rayner tied a beauty, caught a 3 1/4 pound trout on one. Little bit of a twitch with those sometimes can bring them up as well, can't it? That can help. Yeah, a bit of movement. I'm stuck in the water. Yeah, I'm stuck. Come and eat me. So that one always works really well. And I think we've covered so much from the flies and some of the patterns to go with it. But you also, not to stop there, to accompany it, you did have, and you have written Sandy's Fly Box. And did I detect within that a passion for spider fishing as well? And you've alluded to that in how you tie some of your flies. If the answer is yes, why and where did that come about? And what is it that you love so much about them?
Spiders they run through me like blood almost. It's the basis of an awful lot of what I do. It's where I started. It's back to Taft Price in his book, you know. And that section, and just identifying as a kid that I'm in the north, so I look at North Country flies, and it went from there, and the simplicity of it. And I think that they're so elegant, and natural flies are soft. You know that if you try and catch them to take photographs, they're delicate. They are actually quite delicate, especially ephemera. Sedges can be quite delicate as well, depending on which one it is. Stoneflies, obviously, not so much, but it's beside the point. But so flies are soft. So the fish are expecting a fly to be soft. So I never understood why we use stiff hackles. Even as a youngster, I tended to use soft flies because it made sense, because flies are soft, you know, and the fish are expecting the fly to collapse when they put it in their mouth. And I've often found that if I'm using a proper dry fly with a nice stiff hackle that it would either bounce off their nose or they'd spit it out before I had a chance. And just my own experience and my own perception on how it all works. So I think when I'm trying to think now, it must be 26 or 27 years ago, I went to a fly fishing and fly tying evening that was run by the magazine in Perth, and they had Mark Pettijohn across, and he was doing CDC, and that was the first time I'd come across CDC. And I was looking at his flies, and I'm thinking, that's how flies are supposed to work. And I could see patterns that I was trying to make from other feathers that he was doing with CDC, and that was the first time I'd come across it. And I think I bought all the colours that day. It was a case of, fly tying's an addiction, as you know. For anybody that gets into it, and anything new, it's a case, well, I have to have that and that colour and that colour until you know what it works. I mean, these days I use light natural, dark natural, and Mark's old yellow, and his he does a rusty orange as well, and that's basically the only 4 colours of CDC I use. And my materials are far reduced, but yes. So the spider became, well, what can I do with the CDC? And I started playing with it, and then I was spinning it because that was another technique I'd seen him doing, and he was spinning it for bodies and then making it into spent wings and things. And I span it and I looked at it and I thought, well, that looks like a spider. Well, this is good. So I just kept on with that. And my whole, the CDC spider that's in my fly box that's online there, that's probably 70% of my fishing's done with that. And I've it in different sizes and different colours. And then the last few years I've taken to mixing natural game hackles in with it to sort of pull the North Country and this CDC together. That was started with a jingler. I was looking at somebody was extolling the virtues of this jingler, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, I like this, putting the partridge hackle through the thingy hackle and giving it long leg. I wonder if that would work with the CDC. So I put one in with the mix, and it's become my best March Brown imitation I've ever come up with, Again, simple, easy to use, easy to tie. You can make loads of them. You can change the density of it. You can dry it, it floats. You can leave it damp and it sits in the surface. You can sink it floats it. And because of the CDC, it moves like a spider. So it's an incredibly versatile fly, and is really the core of everything I do. From that came, I'd seen Lucien Vassis and Dave McPhail have a CDC dry, which is like a no hackle done. And of course, the no hackle done was something I've been trying to tie for years and get to work, and I could never get them to float properly. And I'm looking at these, and they both did it different ways. And I thought, well, if I fold it up in the middle, double it up and cut it down, then I can create an upwing profile. And if it floats, it'll be good. And it's incredible how well it floats. And I think what happens is the body sinks into the surface and holds it like a rudder. So there's just, all you've got is this wing profile. And that's the fly I call the plume tip. There's quite, again, size, colour. Andrew Ellis's trout stalker dubbing in the different colours for the bodies of the plume tip. That's just been fantastic because, again, you only need a couple of colours. Appleby olive for the light stuff, the scruffy buzzer for the darker olives, and then Highland peat for things like iron blues and stuff. And again, you can minimise what you're doing with it. That fly, we follow the process. That fly of the upwing plume tip sometimes doesn't work so well with the smaller flies. Works really well with the bigger ones. And I was using a Rennie Harrop Biot style emerger for a while because he's probably my all-time hero. If anybody could be classed as my all-time hero, it would be Rennie Harrop. And that fly, I was looking at that one day and I'm thinking, if I put the wing in backwards for the plume tip, and then pull the feathers down to the side, tie them in and put a thorax on it, then I can do exactly the same with the same materials. And that became what I class as the downwing emerger. And that's the next one that follows in that sequence. And they're all variations on the same fly with the wings put in different ways. They're either a spun hackle or a vertical wings that are clipped, or a horizontal wing that's then tied down and clipped. And they make up pretty much all my dries, apart from the split wings, which I use in fast water or really big flies. For probably this year, I'll have some mayfly ones tied up on size 4s and 6s to see if that works. But for the Brook Duns and the March Browns, that John Goddard split wing emerger in orange, the way Scott ties them with the calf tail wings and the little wee tag and everything else, that's an absolute belter for faster water or bigger flies because it floats better. Again, it's all proportion. It's like everything else. That's sort of in a 10 down. You need it. That's that style of fly in order to float. Whereas from a 10 upwards, the plume tip works an absolute treat because the CDC will suspend the fly well enough in the water and give you the right profile. See what else is in there. Really, that's the sedge we covered already. We looked at that. That's again, it's trout stalker dubbin. It's a tag body. It's CDC wing with a bit of elk hair over the top of it. The elk hair, more than anything else, is there for visibility. That's my sighter. Helps with the floating a bit. But it's a sighter. I like elk hair because it's soft. And if I find that the best fly at the beginning of any hatch is always a DHE. Bob White's DHE is, I've got them in all sizes, all colours, all sorts of different things from years and years and years of collections. And I use them in 2 colours, basically, 12, 14. I tie them with mink. I've found mink. I think there's something poetic about using mink to catch trout. Yeah. I think it's just, and it's something, I don't know what it is. It's something about mink. It has that same effect that like water rat has on the water hen blower. I think it's maybe slightly waterproof. So it holds a bit of air, makes the fly glisten, but I find mink is exceptionally good for the body on a DHE, especially the slightly smaller ones. And then it's hare's ear at the front, normal coastal day, just the same way Bob ties them, but with a tag. Same as is on the sedge, it's got a little pearl mirage tag. Anything that sticks its backside in the water basically gets a tag, little mirage tag.
Nice, and it does. It brings me nicely along as well because I'm a big believer in that as well. Certainly from a dry fly perspective as well. And I was going to say it's great to see the deer hair emerger in there. All of these patterns I'll include in the show notes so people can click them and have a look and get ready with there. But coming round to the nymphs as well, that it seemed to me in the selection that you had that the trigger points that you added were more bead colour and thorax rather than a coloured tag at the end. Now, I'm sure you probably do tie some with that, but I wanted to touch on that and see whether that was the case or you do prefer drabber generally patterns with that suggestion of a trigger point with the bead or the thorax.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably for me. Nymphs, I've got a couple of friends who are pathological nymph anglers. They've got thousands of these things in their box, all different sizes, colours, everything else. I'm not a huge nymph fisherman. I'd rather wait until there's a hatch on, but I'm quite happy to fish a nymph if I need to. If some days you just know, or especially early season when you've been stuck in all winter and you want to get out, it doesn't matter what you're fishing as long as you're on the water, it's fine. So nymphs, for me, the humble pheasant tail is about all you ever need. I don't know about you, but I've always found a hare's ear nymph is very good for grayling, but not so good for brownies. But we've no grayling up here, so and pheasant tails always seem to be better for brown trout. That's personal experience. Again, I'm sure it probably doesn't wash for everybody, but certainly for me, a hare's ear is always like a grayling fly. But I also think it's a caddis rather than an ephemera nymph. And the caddis nymphs can be different because they tend to be more pupa, so that you're fishing that during a hatch, whereas the upwing nymphs, where you're using a pheasant tail, you'd be fishing any time because it's stuff that's been washed off a rock or it's fallen, and the fish half expect it to come floating past it at any time, whereas a sedge pupa, they're only going to see during the hatch. So the basic pheasant tail, my biggest problem with a simple pheasant tail was always it doesn't last very long. And it kind of evolved with me. So I now tie them. My pheasant tail's nearly always black. I use melanistic pheasant because it's a natural black, and you get that sort of starlingy iridescence to the body. I use dark Coq de Leon for the tail rather than pheasant tail because it lasts a lot longer, and it gives a fly a less dense profile, which means I can use a size bigger hook. Right, so a size 14 pheasant tail nymph, you can tie with Coq de Leon on a size 12 hook, and you get the same silhouette for the fish. But obviously, you've got a much bigger, stronger hook, which means you've got a better chance of getting the fish in. The thorax is just kept a tiny little bit of sparkle, always dark, because most of the nymphs that do get dislodged are ones that are thinking of hatching, and they tend to have black thorax covers when they start to hatch, as they start to bulk out. And yes, the bead colour, I'll tie them silver and copper. If one doesn't work, the other one usually does. And if the water's coloured, I'll stick a white one on. It's the only thing I really need. I discovered tungsten collars a few years ago, and I tend to fish a smaller bead now, and I put a collar on behind it, but I buy the collars in black so that it becomes part of the thorax. So you get the weight, but you get a much sleeker profile for the nymph rather than having a big chunky nymph bead on the end, just for profile. And the reasoning behind them being black is 9 times out of 10, I'm fishing that nymph through fast water. So the fish needs to spot it quickly and then hit it quickly. And I think if it's a small, dark, strong profile, they'll see it easier and they react quicker. So I think it's definitely caught me more fish going with a really dark coloured nymph. I have lighter coloured ones too, because sometimes if you're really clear water or you're fishing maybe slightly slower, sometimes you need to go onto a reddish or an olivish sort of hue. But I would say 9 times out of 10, I'm always on black, but a natural black, you know?
Yeah. That's a great point. And having spoken with Paul Gaskell on here as well, he was talking about that. Drabber colours seem to be more effective. The white, funnily enough, I've talked about hare's ear and it just doesn't work for me, but I had a back order come in that I'd bought some flies from Fulling Mill, and they're sort of a caddisy hare's ear with a white bead on, which I'm really looking forward to trying at some stage in the proceedings. And like you say, you know, my grayling fishing, well, I've not been able to. The river is about 4 foot up from where it's fishable at the moment. It's been about 7 or 8 feet. So I've done no grayling fishing or barely any. So I'm looking forward to trying all these things out at some stage in the proceedings. But I've noticed, talking to people like yourself and Paul, that drabber seems to be better. So I'm going to stick with that and see how that gets on. Lastly, streamers, really. And, you know, I think probably last time we spoke, we talked about those and how they've gained in popularity. And, you know, anything that's called a Charlie Craven swim coach or, of course, a sex dungeon, I'm in on. Are they an important part of your arsenal? Are they something that you like to play with a lot?
No, not really. They're really good fun to fish. I know we spoke about it the last time I was on, and I was going to give it a more of a try. I did give it more of a try. I seem to catch salmon with them rather than trout, which is fun on 4 and 5 weight rods, but not really what I was aiming for. I think the swim coach, Martin's Minnow as well. Martin's Minnow is a exceptionally, another straightforward, simple tie, immensely effective fly. That's been a big addition. I've got, I say, swim coaches, Sex Dungeons, Martin's Minnows. I've got some woolly buggers in my box. They do get used, usually if the water's coloured and I can't pick them up on nymphs, or I'm near a tributary or somewhere where it looks like there might be something or some streamy water. I'll go and fish them for a wee while, but I can't say it really floats my boat that much. I love tying them. Now, from a fly tying perspective, they're absolutely wonderful fun to sit, and it's a different mindset. So most of my flies are designed, I can tie them quickly, fast. I can bulk tie half a dozen flies, 10 minutes, and they're done. And that refills the holes in the box from the day. That's the whole. They're all designed to be like that. Whereas with the streamers, you'll sit down with all of this piles of stuff, the book open, and go step by step going through it, building this fly. You don't tie them, you build them. And that's really good fun. But you're talking 45 minutes to a fly, So the second you get one stuck up a tree, you're going, it makes you cry. You think, oh, God, I don't know what it is. But, I think of all the ones I've tried, the swim coach is my favourite. There's something about the way it acts in the water. It has more movement than any Rapala or anything like that. It really does. We've all fished spinners years ago because it was all phases we went through. And I'm used to seeing all the jointed ones and all the rest. And you watch this thing swim, and it's like it looks far more natural. And you think, well, yeah, I can see why the fish aren't going to. They're going to really like this. It's putting it in the right place. I think it's a really fun thing to research. I think you go and look up Charlie Craven or Kerry Gallup or even Stuart Smith and Martin at what's the MB Custom Flies. You look up their stuff and see what they're doing. I mean, a lot of it's geared towards pike and perch and other predators, but they're trout flies as well. And that in itself, I think, is quite fascinating. It's fascinating watching the stuff on YouTube, watching these guys fishing these things. There's lots of Kelly Gallup's early videos of him fishing streamers and showing how he does it. And it's not what you think. He's casting them upstream at short range, and he's only fishing them over a 20-foot stretch. And it's looking for an instant hit all the time, And if it doesn't work, he moves. And that side of it fascinates me. But when I get on the river, I don't really do it.
I'm exactly the same, that you get there with best intentions. And it's this time of year, isn't it, that you always say, oh, I'm going to do a bit of this, I'm going to do a bit of that. And I do, but give me a rising fish. And I don't mean that in a superior, I don't mean it in a snobby. I just love, as Aitor, as I always say, Aitor Coteron I had on here said, I just love seeing the dry on the surface and a fish come up and eat it. And you know what? That's it for me, and that'll do for me. But it's been lovely to get so much information. Listeners, I think, will glean so much from this that I really sincerely hope that they take with them coming into this new season. Where can listeners find the information, the fly box, the fly patterns, and everything else? Where can they get there? Where's the website on Mike's site there?
Well, you need to go into the main site, which is www.fishingthefly.co.uk. And when you're on there, you can go to the River Don section. Within the River Don section, there's a description for fishing the river. There's a description of the baits. There's a description of traditional flies, and that's where the natural flies and the new fly box one. It's all in there. And as I say, each one you can save as a link onto your phone as well, so you can use it on the mobile while you're out, which is great. But that's where you'll find it.
Brilliant. And have a look at that, folks, because I think there is so much information there. I think it's such a good idea. It's so useful. It helps us become more informed anglers, I guess, about what's going on. And you can actually say, well, that is a brook dun, or it's a March brown, or it's a blue-winged olive. But look at the colour. All of those sorts of things, that'll be really useful for you. And I hope that you'll get as much out of this podcast and the link when you click that. As I said, I'll put that on the show notes as well, as I have. I think it's fantastic. I'm always looking to learn. I'm always looking to understand things a little bit more. Also, Sandy, if people want to track you down, how can they find you?
Me? Well, I'm Sandy's Custom Fly Rods on Instagram. It's the easiest way to find me. You'll also find, when you're on there, fishingthefly.co.uk, my webpage is on there as well that links you to the rod, gives you my email address, and everything's on there too. So I'm easy to find.
Fantastic. Yeah, you're easy to hunt down. We have talked nearly an hour and a half. This has gone on longer than normal, but I'm really pleased it has. And I hope listeners have stuck with this. I hope they've enjoyed this as much as me. Sandy, as always, it's an absolute pleasure. And this is all free. You've taken so much time and effort to put this together. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the fishing community for doing this as well, because I think it's a really cool thing you've done. So I'd like to thank you for doing this. I'd like to thank you again for being such a great and entertaining guest on the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm all embarrassed now. Look, for me, information's for sharing. If you know something, you should be telling. There's no secrets. It's all about catching fish and having fun.
Absolutely. That sounds the perfect way to end. So, everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this slightly extended version, but I'm sure you'll agree that it's worth letting it run its natural course. And I'm really pleased it has. As ever, there will be no charge for these podcasts. They'll always be free. Like Sandy, in my tiny little way, I think information's for sharing, and I'm proud to be able to share what Sandy has put together. So thank you so much for listening. If you have enjoyed, perhaps you'll consider subscribing and perhaps leaving a review or rating the podcast. That helps me find more people, and we can help share information with our community. So thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.